behalf of Transit Alliance, introduce you to Gregg Lintern. Gregg is the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning Division of the City of Toronto. He used to be the head of city planning in the city of Etobicoke and Director of Community Planning for Toronto and East York District. He's got a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Toronto. And he's the gentleman that is responsible for everything that's going on from a transit standpoint from a transit and planning standpoint in Toronto today. So Gregg, welcome to our show. How are you?
I'm pretty good, Brian. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
It's great. It's great to see turnout this afternoon. I'm looking forward to having a good chat about transit and city building. Those two always go together really well.
Excellent. You've got a presentation. Do you want to start with that presentation, or do you have any introductory remarks before?
No, we'll start with that. And I don't have many slides. I just thought I'd prompt the conversation with a bit of a setup, and then we can get into having a chat. It'd be great.
Excellent. And I just remind all those people that have joined, and some of you on telephones that have just recently joined, if you could possibly mute your phone, that would be helpful, because what you end up doing is clouding out the screens. And what I'll do is I'll go through and forcibly mute you if you don't mute yourselves, but that could be problematic later on. And Gregg, I think your screen is up. Can you see it?
That's great. I'm just waiting. I don't quite see it yet.
There's sometimes a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
You don't see it?
There we go. Yeah, there it is. It's great. So thank you, Brian. I wanted to just kind of, the title of this is about keeping Toronto moving. It sounds metaphorical in so many ways, but certainly one of the city's major priorities, along with building more housing, dealing with building complete communities, climate action, equity, the whole transformation of government. These are some of the priorities, but and they all intertwine and they all kind of mutually support each other. But I give it a bit of a focus on keeping Toronto moving and give you a sense of what the conversation is like right now, especially when you think about COVID and what the intersection of transit planning and land use planning is all about. So the next slide, please.
Do you get it?
Yep. So, it's something that we maybe all fondly remember from experimentation last year. And you can hear me okay, Brian?
I can hear you fine. If everyone can possibly mute, I'd appreciate it.
That's great. I think we all remember this scene that showed up in some of our parks last year during the first wave of the pandemic. People were asking what was.
You've muted, Gregg.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All good?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. When you transport yourself back 1 year and you think about the city at that time and what we might have been thinking about, it's really been quite a journey that we've been on over the last year. I want to just take people back through some of the conversation that we had last year, but also give you a sense of what city building looks like in a post COVID kind of environment. So the whole question of The impact of COVID for me and for many is raising more questions and producing fewer answers right now. The whole series of discussion around what sectors are being impacted is quite fascinating, whether it's retail main streets, whether it's office is quite a popular topic. The whole notion of impact on service, the service economy, is quite significant. I have read, and many have read, that there's no equivalent example of a shutdown of economic and social systems the way there has been through the course of the pandemic. It's quite an unprecedented event. It almost sounds like an obvious statement to make, but when you look for solutions and you look back in history, it is hard to find an equivalent event where such economic and social disruption and indeed shutdown has happened at the same time. We focused a lot when we think about transit planning. We focus a lot on commuting and how people move around in a regular rhythm. But increasingly, the question is going to become, I think, how people move around throughout the day and around the region in perhaps a less commuter-focused manner. And it's some question to keep in mind as we discuss the post-pandemic city. The other thing to remember is that while there's been a lot of a conversation about how or what the impact is of work from home, 66% of the people still can't work from home. They still have jobs that mean that they have to go to a workplace, and that's a Canadian-wide number, but very much has implications for the GTA. Our emphasis is, of course, how many of us are in our living rooms and our bedrooms working on computers, but many people, in fact, the majority, are still going to work in a workplace. So again, these are some of the kind of situational issues that we're dealing with. And again, the sectoral shutdown that's been happening with retail, with service, with cultural industries, with entertainment industries, the impact of COVID is quite seismic. Next slide, please. How COVID impacts the city at different scales is also should also be a big part of the conversation. When you think about the change that it might mean at a local scale in your local neighborhood where you live, that's one way of looking at it, or how it's affecting the city at a regional scale. As I pointed out, people still are moving around to go to work. They're still, to some extent, moving around, of course, to go and get their essential services and food. And there may not be moving around as much for entertainment and visiting, but that whole sense of scale is really important when you're thinking about what kind of city we have now and what kind of city we can build toward coming out of COVID. Another really important aspect to keep in mind is that the way the city has evolved over the last 20 and 30 years is very uneven. There are some transit-rich areas, as we all know, and some areas that rely on just a bus network, and they have lower order transit capacity. The whole effort over the last while has been to build up a network. And the unevenness of the landscape across the city, where so many areas perhaps are overheated with development, they may be deficient in infrastructure, compared to other areas that have not seen reinvestment, that have not seen change, that have not seen any kind of transit-inspired redevelopment the way areas like Yonge and Eglinton, for example, have. So that landscape, in addition to the local and regional scale, that landscape is really, really important to put in mind, to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So you know, everybody, I hope, enjoyed a patio or two last summer, and the patios will be back. COVID has been an accelerator for so many different aspects of city life, and things that we may have been hotly debating before COVID, you know, all of a sudden they started to happen. Resistance, if you will, or the conversation got pushed out of the way, and we were able to accelerate quite a number of things. On the housing front, taking action on modular housing for the first time in the City of Toronto in a programmatic way to deal with homelessness, bringing city properties to the market through our Housing Now program in a more accelerated manner. We're looking at parking minimums for the first time, whether or not we want to eliminate those parking minimums. We're looking at expanding housing options in neighborhoods for something that we have not looked at in an in-depth and comprehensive manner in the past. The way we practice government, virtual consultation, we did 128 virtual consultation meetings over the course of last year into the early part of this year. Totally new platform, totally new way of engaging with Torontonians. Of course, there's the whole issue of remote work has been quite prevalent. I think a really robust conversation as well around equity. The fact that so many Torontonians were not experiencing the economic and social environment that other Torontonians were, the vulnerable populations of the city, all of that consideration is something that it was brought to the fore certainly last year with anti-Black racism. But what response the city has through its policy and practice to respond in a more equitable fashion going forward. And even in the delivery of development review, something as straightforward as that, and a renewed emphasis of the city to refocus its effort on how it deals with development approvals. Next slide, please. Just a quick, planning lesson for the audience that the whole response to COVID is influenced by the policies that guide growth across the city today. This is our structure map from the official plan, and this focuses growth in a way that has always been transit oriented. 88% of the city's growth has happened in close proximity to higher order transit lines. The importance of that linkage. Many people have always said the best transit plan is a land use plan, marrying up intensification with higher order transit has always been a great formula for building the city. 60% of our growth is targeted for city's suburbs, the 416 suburbs. So really the emphasis on continuing to build that network, and very much though grounded on the fact that we already have a transit oriented plan. What can we do next to further enhance the approach that we have here in our approved plan as we work toward an updated official plan? We have our centers, of course. People know about North York and Scarborough, Yonge and Eglinton, Kipling, out at Kipling and Islington, the downtown, our avenues. Where will these lines blur? Where will we see new growth and change? And when you flip to the next map, you will see that we're busy focusing even more on the orientation of development in association with existing and planned transit. The growth plan amendment that the province has approved is requiring us to bring forward official plan amendments that call for minimum amounts of density in proximity, 500 to 800 meters of transit. And this map shows you both the existing transit facilities in the city, including Finch and Eglinton that are under construction, and the planned subway expansions and LRT expansions that are currently on the books from the province of Ontario. So taken together, this represents, the next direction that we're heading in, where more centers, where higher densities will be encouraged and permitted in proximity to transit. You know, the MTA, what we call the major transit station areas that are shown on this map, also the importance of planning for affordable housing. So through what's called protected major transit station areas, and including ways of securing affordable housing in close proximity to transit, so people don't have to own a car, and making sure that those density uplifts that happen in proximity to transit include a percentage of affordable housing. So it's all a very kind of important formula for the future success of the city. In the next slide, I'll just highlight that an important part of this is exactly how transit-oriented communities, and we've used the term transit-oriented development, but how transit-oriented communities actually manifest themselves. And again, this is not new in my view. This is something that's already entrenched in our official plan. And as we undertake those planning reviews for what I just showed you on the MTSAs, linking those transit improvements to planning permissions. One thing that we do at a station area scale is just figure out how transit gets installed in an urban environment, how that station area itself works in an urban setting. And that means, does it induce you know, a comfortable and accessible and safe public realm? Does it support all that? Does it set up high quality development? And does it encourage walkability, cycling to local transit stations? There's lots of things that you can do when you build a transit area in an urban setting to make sure that you've induced high quality development, mixed use development, and other supportive forms of development. So that's one scale of focus, but the other scale of focus has been working with the province and the industry to understand how even more higher scale and higher density development can occur in proximity to transit. And you know, this is new. The province has not been in this business before of engaging third parties in how transit happens. So that's a new area for the province. And frankly, it's a new area for the city in understanding how to make these relationships work. We're used to working with developers, we do that every day, but the complexity, added complexity of working with both Metrolinx, IO, the Ministry of Transportation, in coordinating our effort to bring a third-party element into the transit mix is something that we're figuring out. And some, you know, fresh examples, if you will. This one just shows what's happening down at Mr. Christie's, where the city is leading a secondary plan process with an applicant to build a new community, quite a high-density community, in fact. And the province and the developer have agreed on proceeding with a new transit station. So they're kind of aligned and running alongside and mutually supportive. One of the better examples, I think, of what's been happening. And again, it's all new in terms of bringing a third party into the mix to achieve transit. The next slide, please. So I'm just going to finish off here before we get into some of the discussion, just to emphasize again how much the network at a local level is important to connect to a growing regional network in transit planning, so that it can induce or support the choice to live locally, to shop locally, to work locally, but leave you with the option, if you need to move around the city and connect into that regional transit network that's happening. You can't, you know, don't apply one lens to this. Not everybody is the same, and not everybody's in the same circumstances. So having that variety, that access to opportunity and that choice is so vitally important as we think about the post-COVID city. I'm not a big believer in these headlines around the flight from cities and the flight from Toronto. I think the ebb and flow of city life is going to continue, but I think the COVID kind of lens has really accentuated some of the things we need to work harder on. And I remain very, I think, constructively optimistic about our ability to pull out of this situation that we're in and continue to solve a lot of the challenges that face Toronto, one of North America's actually leading urban areas. So with that, I'll leave it there. And Brian, I'm happy to get into a little bit of a chat with you about some of the more specific questions you might have.
Well, that's excellent. I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much. I wonder if I could ask a couple of questions about your last comment that you don't think that this sort of exodus from downtown is going to continue. We had Joe Barrage come and speak to us a couple of months ago, and he was saying that even the elevators in the downtown towers wouldn't be able to have enough capacity to get people up in a socially distant, in a publicly health minded manner. He thought that a lot of companies, even once we're vaccinated, had found out that home-based work worked. And while we may come back some of the time, we won't go back full time. And so therefore, downtown Toronto may be challenged from a commercial standpoint. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I talked to Mike Williams before he retired from the city, just before he left in December. And, you know, we both agreed that it's just too early to draw long-term conclusions. There isn't a lot of robust evidence that that kind of exodus is permanent. I know right now the occupancy load downtown is running about 5%. So it is quite a scary and low number. There's no question about it. But I also think that we, just as we were blind to the pandemic, we're a bit blind to the post-pandemic reality of what and how people are going to behave. I'm in the camp, the strong camp that people are social animals first and foremost, and that they will continue to want to congregate in workplaces, whether that's 20% less than what they do now, because 20% of them might be working from home on a given day. I still strongly believe that the essential and foundational elements of human behavior are going to trump everything else, and that people are going to want to come together in some way, shape, or form. I'm willing to take 20% off the top if you want to push me on it, but I really don't believe that, practically speaking and sociologically speaking, that people are going to be able to withstand the actually the absence of each other any longer than they absolutely have to.
So I have an office at Bay Front. I've been to it maybe 6 times since a year ago. I used to travel every week for the last 4 years, and I haven't left this room here that I'm in right now for most of the last 9 months. And yet, you know, continue business and be reasonably efficient. And I think a lot of people find that they are reasonably efficient. Do you think that everything that we've learned during COVID-19 in regards to home-based work is actually going to change?
Well, again, if you want to force me into a number, I'll take 20%. We'll do the Brian Crombie thing a few days of the week. But tell me how you're feeling, Brian. Are you really being honest with yourself? Like, I think it's going to end up being a mix. I think people have discovered something, but remember, you are in a certain sector, a certain business. It might be working very well for you. It may not be working as well for other people who I know in a lot of, for example, in a lot of creative industries where people would come together around a table and be kicking stuff around on a whiteboard. I know you can do all that electronically, but I really strongly feel something's missing when people aren't allowed to come together. And they're, somebody dropped by the other night, socially distant outside, and was telling my, and they were 22 years old, and they were telling my daughter that wow, they went in the office for 4 days straight with 10 other people. Again, practicing physical distancing, but they thought it was such a neat thing
to be back.
And I thought, wow, that's great for a 22-year-old.
Okay, so let me try to keep probing you on this if I could. We had Ken Greenberg and Jennifer Keesmaat on one of our meetings a couple months ago, and they had a different point of view, and that was this movement to complete communities in sort of exurb or urban suburban locations was going to occur, because while people may not stay at home, what they'll want to do is go to Yonge and Eglinton or Yonge and Sheppard or the Airport Corporate Center, and it's going to become more of a complete community where it's either the within 2 miles you can work, live, play, etc., or 15-minute drive. And so therefore, downtown Toronto is not going to be the place to invest. It's going to be Mr. Christie or Etobicoke or other more suburban urban locations. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a track that we definitely have been on. I mean, I don't really grab onto the 15-minute city brand. It's a fashionable thing to say, and it's not realistic in its purest sense for everybody. But the whole idea of mixed use planning permissions is founded on the idea that you could live, work, and play in close proximity. And that I think that's great for the environment. I think that's great for the economy. I think that's great for daily living. And we have talked about mixed use, for 40 or 50 years. And in fact, it's a very old idea. So for sure, I would subscribe to that kind of decentralization, if you want to call it, if you want to use planning jargon, and creating more places where people could experience that level of choice. There are a couple of key ingredients, though, to that. One is, I think, the mobility networks that we have to support that. So first of all, you need a really good local mobility network. You need safe places for people to walk. And think about that in a suburban situation. Remember, suburban situations are not as walk friendly and not as bike friendly. So you've got to build that up. The bus network and scaling it up from LRT, subway, and regional GO. So having these layers of mobility and a network, a really stronger, a much stronger network, including such things as bus priority networks. All of these elements, I think, underscore or are foundational to that whole concept of local living, whether you want to call it the 15-minute city. So I think what Jennifer and Ken are talking about is definitely something that I could see continuing to happen. Again, I don't see it as new. I just see it as something that we need to be more deliberate about and more diligent about, and especially in suburban context, because in the urban context, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we already have it. You already have those abilities and those choices. I think in the suburban context, where so much of our growth is headed, when you think about the Downsview lands, you think about Christie's again, Golden Mile, Celestica, there's all kinds of examples of where we're trying to create these environments for that type of formula to work.
Other than the provision of transit to those locations, are you doing anything from a planning standpoint to spur that development in the suburban, urban locations?
Well, I think it's a formula of complete communities. We've got to think about daily life, parks, services, infrastructure, affordable housing, schools. You want people to be able to experience, it's not just housing. You want people to experience, a city environment, an urban environment where they have that ability to go about with relative ease their daily life, and different ages and stages, whether they have kids, whether they're in midlife, whether they're seniors, thinking about all those population, also thinking about income, and some of these areas might be change areas where people might get pushed out, and we've got to think seriously about that. We're doing an interesting study up in Little Jamaica, where we're just as concerned about displacement and the downside of gentrification on the existing population there, and making sure that businesses and people who are there are not pushed out by the forces of land value, the forces that would increase land values and have them pushed out. So there's a whole complexity there that I think we have a responsibility to address.
One of our members, Hunter Milbourne, was telling us that Condos have been this huge development over the course of the last couple of years that supposedly we've had more cranes in Toronto than any other city in North America. But he said, even though condo prices are down, both in rental and price in the downtown core, we're going to have more condos open up this next year than we've ever had in history. Are you worried about oversupply of condos downtown?
No, I'm not. It's cyclical, and we're coming off a big construction wave, and we knew this kind of bulge was going to happen. We've known it for a few years. We average probably around 15,000 units under construction every year, but that's waved around a little bit with the enthusiasm of the pre-pandemic times. We're approving just over 25,000 units a year. So that pipeline is fairly robust. The market it'll wash through in time. I mean, I was around when we had a so-called glut of office space, and that diminished over time. I think, you got to think more about the fundamentals of Toronto. A very good, safe, well-run city comparatively when you think about other cities in North America and indeed the world, and what attracts immigration to Toronto. A good, safe civil society, a good public school system, public health care. These are all really strong fundamentals that have not changed. And I think we got to keep our eye on building a high quality urban environment, and we got to watch out for those who were already having a hard time before the pandemic. There is a downside to that, all that enthusiasm in the pre-COVID city, and that was how some people were being left out. And we have to redouble our efforts on making sure that we provide affordable housing and other ways to support our vulnerable populations and make them a part of the success of the city.
You mentioned the modular housing that you got approval to build last year. Michael Spaziani, who is an architect and urban planner, was saying that our zoning regulations make it easy to build things that are 100 units per acre or more, or suburban locations that are 6 units per acre or less, but make it very difficult for us to build the type of communities that people actually want to live in. He called it the missing middle. He was saying that people want to live in Bloor West Village or Roncesvalles or the beaches, which are somewhere between 20 and 40 units per acre. And he said the biggest impediment to that isn't the market, it's zoning.
Yeah, zoning is part of the puzzle. Zoning is not a panacea to the world's problems. Some people think it is, but I think it's part of the mix, and I'm not going to say that changes the zoning bylaw wouldn't help. But if zoning was changed and interest rates were 20%, nothing would happen. So there's lots of inputs into the supply and demand of housing. But just on zoning, I love as of right zoning. I think the more we can make things easy for people to avail themselves of, the better off we'll be, whether it's missing middle or mid-rise. One of the big initiatives the city has underway is what we call expanding housing options in neighborhoods, which is fancy title for missing middle. And that's looking at, we've already, made second suites and laneway suites as of right. We are now looking at garden suites, which is basically a laneway suite without a laneway, and other forms of, low or gentle density intensification in neighborhoods. It'll be an interesting conversation to have with Torontonians, because imagine there's lots of people on your call who won't necessarily want their neighbor to build a garden suite. And maybe there are some people on your call that will. So, we're going to have that conversation with Torontonians. But what's really important is the people on the call should ask themselves where their kids are going to live, where their cousins are going to live, if they want to live in Toronto. What choices do they have? So, it's more about, I think the conversation should be more about the future of the city and thinking about the city 20 years from now and asking ourselves, where do future Torontonians hope to live? How how is it that we invite Torontonians to live, or new Torontonians to live here, but we don't let them in our neighborhoods? I don't know that that makes any sense anymore. I think there's a real opportunity to invite some more folks into our neighborhoods, whether it's in an accessory apartment, in a garden suite, a laneway suite, or maybe it's a duplex or a triplex. So there's lots of room there without kind of throwing the neighborhood out the door. I think the scale and the look and the feel of neighborhoods, I'm not talking at all about blowing that up. I think it's important, though, to examine what the real opportunities are for some gentle density in neighborhoods.
You showed us a picture of some restaurant patios on the parking lanes. Is that going to happen again this summer? Is it going to be permanent? What do you think we've learned about going outside, whether in the summer or frankly all year long, both from a restaurant standpoint as well as bike lanes and retail, et cetera?
What have we learned? I think we've learned a little bit to get over ourselves around the types of things that we may have gone to Europe to experience before, and we realized that we can do it right here in Toronto without too much of an effort. I know, we work really closely with Barbara Gray and others in transportation who work diligently and very difficult work, fast work last summer to paint lines and put up bollards and other things to reimagine some of our street spaces. It is coming back with a force this year, which is great. And certainly there's lots of buzz about whether or not it could be made permanent. The trade-offs that Torontonians are asked to make, whether it's, a 2-minute delay driving across Bloor Street because, 400 people happen to be out on a patio. I think that's a fairly good trade-off to make when you think about the types of spaces that can be created. They're safer spaces, first of all. They're a more balanced use of public space. They're more enjoyable. They're more amenable to city life. I think we were built for the outdoors much more than we realize. So yeah, it's coming back, and hopefully there'll be a lot of interest in seeing it made permanent.
I've been really worried about Main Street retail. Driving around some of King Street, Queen Street, Lakeshore, et cetera. There's so many stores that are closed and there's signs up for lease. What's going to happen there? And is there anything that the city government can do to help?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mentioned in my opening remarks that it's one of the question marks of COVID that hasn't been answered yet. The structure of our main streets with Main Street retail, and it's not just retail, but it's services and it's restaurants. Foundationally, I think that's pretty sound. Whether it becomes thinned out for a time because of this is something that we're working our way through. We've seen some innovation in the way that street retail is starting to happen, walk-up windows and other innovations that people are starting to introduce. A lot of synergy between online retail and bricks and mortar retail, that people are getting into how they manage both, much more so than they did before COVID. I think the jury's out, but I come back to the fundamental kind of form that people do enjoy that social experience of moving through cities the way they have for hundreds and hundreds of years, and experiencing the city life that one can enjoy on a sidewalk. I mean, it's what Jane Jacobs called one of the key ingredients of a successful city. So I don't know. I'm willing to see it modify and adjust, and I'm not willing, but I'm thinking that it will have to cope with the change for quite a while to come. But I'm also hopeful that we'll see new and innovative forms of retail that will survive.
The big sidewalks development that was planned for East Toronto is gone. What do you think is going to happen in that area and the Portlands area?
Well, I mean, Sidewalk is a 12-acre site, formerly Sidewalk. It's Keysight. really, and it's a 12-acre site. And just to distinguish between the two, Keysight is not the Portlands, and the Portlands is not Keysight. The Portlands is hundreds of acres, and that's a transformation that's underway with the new river, and you can see the first bridge delivered there, and it'll have new transit and a series of new communities built. Keysight is a 12-acre development site, and Waterfront Toronto, working together with the City of Toronto, will be bringing that back to the market this spring to see a new innovative and mixed-use community built there in the fullness of time.
Will there be transit that goes to Keysight and the Portlands?
Yeah, as part of the Waterfront Transit Reset that was approved by Council, we are currently in the planning stages for the extension of the Waterfront LRT east from Bay Street over to Parliament and beyond. The plan certainly is to loop that streetcar service through the Portlands and ultimately link it up through Broadview. So, there is a transit network plan, just like every other part of the city. And some elements of it are costly. Certainly coming out of the tunnel, out of Union Station has to be partially rebuilt. But those plans are being advanced. I think we're, in between 10 and 30% design there. So we want to get ourselves ready for transit funding that comes along, and it is one of the city's priority transit projects.
What do you think is going to happen? What's your vision for Ontario Place and the exhibition?
We did some work with Exhibition Place over the last couple of years, and have developed a master plan for Exhibition Place. It has a nod to Ontario Place. I foresee both areas as really a campus of public uses, and continuing to build upon the kind of sports, entertainment, convention, tourism, and experiential uses that you see there. I mean, I would love to see kind of old-fashioned, and would love to see the Sailors Pub back at Ontario Place, for those of you who remember it.
Yes.
I think, very few places you can actually eat and drink on the water in Toronto. And I think, building back some of that great stuff in Ontario Place, maintaining a high degree of public access, but building a campus of uses and activities both at Exhibition Place and Ontario Place would be really positive. And, the Ontario line is headed in that direction with a stop at Exhibition Place. We're extending the streetcar service through Exhibition up, and the King Street service will come down Dufferin and loop through. So it'll be kind of, transit supportive or transit related development that'll happen there in the fullness of time, which is also very positive because you won't have to take your car there.
What's your vision for Toronto? What do you sort of dream of 20 years from now?
Well, I talked a little bit earlier about, and what drives me is waking up a sunny morning in 2051, God willing, and looking around and feeling fairly satisfied that a lot of people had access to the city who don't have access to the city now. And I wonder about who is going to live here. I don't want us to become a polarized city where only some people can afford to live here. Our strength in the past has been around the diversity of our economy, and frankly, the diversity in our society. And I think the health and well-being of the city relies so much on the health and well-being of its residents. COVID has really made people think about the social determinants of health. And when you think about that, you think about housing, you think about public space, think about mental health, think about equity. I think if we focus on all of those things, we'll be on the right track. And that's really my vision for the city when I wake up in the morning in 2051, and I feel, relatively happy about the progress that we've been able to make.
Excellent. Are there any questions from our audience today for Gregg Lintern? If you do, just raise your hand. Let me know if you're interested. Send me a chat. Len, go ahead.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Len.
Len Abelman from WZMH Architects. I met you earlier with in an OA talk recently.
Oh, yes.
So I was wondering, kind of an extension of Brian Crombie's questions. There's a lot of talk about the yellow belt, and you know, is there a way to convert part of the yellow belt to you know, residential to kind of apartment neighborhood, especially at edges around public transit? You know, like, for example, if you look at the future LRT line that's going to run along Eglinton West, you have some sites that are yellow, they're neighborhood, but they're actually also adjacent to that major corridor. And just an example, like there's major pushback from communities not wanting change. On the other hand, we do have to look at ways to intensify our cities around nodes of public transit. So I just wondered if you can see that, any policies around that changing in the near future.
Yeah, the MTSAs that I mentioned and the proximity to transit stations are, we have a policy-driven environment in Ontario where the provincial government sets a direction and then we are obliged to implement it through our official plan. So when we look at those MTSAs and we look at the proximity around those transit stations, you will often see, the Main Street environment certainly around those transit stations, and whether or not that's high or medium density development, you kind of sort that out. But then as you point out, immediately adjacent to that is, low rise. That's a typical kind of Toronto condition. And I think we'll be looking at how to, at a minimum, how to intensify the zoning permissions within those areas so that we can focus on some missing middle opportunities, whether they be, triplex, fourplex, sixplex. I think about the box of a house and the size of a house. A typical, and you're an architect, you probably know this better than I do, but the way that you could carve up that volume, if you can have a 6,000 square foot house sometimes in the zoning, but do you want a 6,000 square foot unit or 6 1,000 square foot units? So that's the kind of, methodology that we want to bring to this, is understanding what that potential is in the missing middle, but also that relationship that you point out to proximity to transit. And the logic there, I think, is pretty strong, that those opportunities should exist.
Can I ask you?
We've already started actually to do some of that up, our first PMTSA up at Keele and Finch. We've already proposed an increase in the density forms in the proximity of the transit station in the neighborhoods.
Greg, we had two questions as well from people. How about garden suites as another venue for container type construction? And also, what about putting more open event spaces in Greenland and park areas for urban dwellers?
Yeah, garden suites. I mean, I've heard from many laneway small boutique architects and small development companies who are very interested in that, and bringing a modular to that repertoire is, I think, something that's going to happen just like that. We've already seen some stuff on Queen Street East, for example, from our house, who are building a modular in a Main Street condition, like 4, 5, 6 stories modular. The city itself is doing modular with our supportive housing projects that we've initiated, and I think it's completely transferable to garden suites. And even if you're just pre-constructing elements and bringing them in, the construction period is so much shorter, the interference is so much shorter, and the economy of constructing that off-site and then bringing in the pieces and snapping it together in a matter of weeks. I think it sounds great and really positive for the economy.
Are there any other questions that people in the audience have for Gregg Lintern? What about getting better access to the airport corporate zone? It's been something that Mayor John Tory talked about a lot when he initially focused on smart tracks. It's the second largest employment zone in Canada. And you've shown in one of the maps a couple of proposed transit benefits there, but it seems like it's one of the the biggest challenges we've got. The Neptis report at one point in time said that major cities worldwide that have been successful have direct transit connections between their major employment zone and their secondary employment zone. And they commented about Manhattan versus New Jersey and Brooklyn, and Champs-Élysées versus La Défense, City of London and Canary Wharf. And they said, we're completely lacking. It takes 45 minutes by car to get from the airport corporate zone to downtown. What can we do there?
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that, Brian, is the office development that's proposed at East Harbor, the downtown, and then Liberty Village, and connecting all three of those employment nodes, if you will, such that you could leave East Harbor in a short sleeve shirt, jump on the train and go to Liberty Village for a meeting. I know you can do that virtually right now. But with Airport Corporate Center, it is at the tail end of Mississauga's transit that's under construction, or if not built now, last time I checked. But it's also at the tail end of the first phase of the Eglinton West extension, which is one of the 4 Ontario priority projects. So the crosstown would be extended out of Mount Dennis and head west along Eglinton Avenue over to Renforth as a first phase. That project is in advanced planning right now. I think the province has got elements of that out to tender. And the second phase of that would be connecting it up into the airport. So that is very much on the books and something that is planned as a priority project of the province and is funded.
Rick Ciccarelli wanted to ask about transit hub development. When is the Choice Property site south of Mount Dennis Station going to come in with a proposal? I understand it's currently in discussions with the city.
I don't have an update on that. I know that it's currently a no frills store and a gas station. I would expect that years and years ago there was a proposal for that site. I would expect that we would see something again in the future, given the opening of the Mount Dennis station.
JP, did you want to ask about the cost of burying tunnels? I guess not. JP is asking, what about the cost of burying tunnels? I presume he's talking about the Eglinton crosstown, and is it worth it?
Well, I mean, whether it's worth it or not, the province is doing it. So, far be it from me to judge a decision that's already been made. I've got other things to do, and I'm not going to spend my time speculating on whether or not woulda, shoulda, coulda. We're moving ahead with that decision, and we're working hard to relate that transit infrastructure to development, because really that's what's most important at the end of the day, is making sure that there's a better relationship between development and transit.
Was the King Street pilot a success? Is it going to be made permanent? Will you extend it to other streets?
Well, I think very much a success, and it already is permanent. And will it extend? I think the whole notion of transit priority is here to stay. Our next emphasis is on 5 bus lines in the suburbs, where we've already laid down one on Eglinton East, and we're busy planning 4 others, which have been identified by the TDC to bring that kind of priority service. Remember, I mentioned the fact that 66% of the people still journey to work at a Canadian level, and there are lots of people in Toronto who are still getting on the bus and moving around, and it's really important to think of them too and how we can improve their daily commute.
Moaz, do you want to ask your question? It'll be the last question if you do.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Actually would like to ask, because we were talking about the waterfront, the city did have the transit first vision for the East Bay Front. It didn't work out. There are, a whole collection of reasons why, but Greg, could you tell us what the city has learned from that experience with transit first? I know that the East Bay Front LRT they just had a public meeting. They're moving forward, but they're not moving forward as they planned. So what have we learned from that?
I don't know, we put that in the secondary plan for the waterfront, the central waterfront, that it should be transit first. And transit first relies on alignment of so many things, including funding and the priority wars, I'll call it, that occur, whether it be between the city, the province, and the federal government to provide the funding. Our focus as staff, and I think from the community, you hear a lot of focus and continued diligence on the merit of waterfront transit. And I'm confident that we'll get there. It's one of the city's priority projects. It's taken probably a lot longer than it should have, but the development is materializing now on the eastern waterfront, and that transit planning is advancing to a point where I believe the argument will become irresistible, and we will design and get greater confidence in the cost of that transit facility as well, which always helps when we're going to seek funding from other levels of government. The city itself has, stepped up and funded transit directly as well, and having our part of that equation settled, the design done, our part of the funding done, a good solid plan done around it that supports the transit investment. All of those pieces are in place. So, the lesson, is stay stubborn and stay diligent about making these plans and getting it ready for the stars to align.
I'd like to call on Saba Ahmed. She's one of our board members at Transit Alliance, a local lawyer. Saba.
Thanks, Brian. Brian has asked me to thank you, Gregg Lintern, for bringing us all together. I learned so much. Really appreciated your comments today. Thank you very much for being with us. And I also wanted to thank you, Brian, for putting this together and for moderating as usual, and also our attendees. Thank you. This has been a highlight for my day, as it always is when we have these programs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Saba. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate you joining us. And just as a reminder to everyone, Transit Alliance is a civic organization, and we encourage you to join up if you're not already a member. We're trying to survive through COVID virtually before we get back to our regular meetings in the fall. So please check out Transit Alliance website and join up if you're at all interested. Mr. Lintern, thank you so much for everything you're doing. Saba, thanks for the thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, for
joining. Good
joining.
afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Rick.